same asset is now being used twice in two different ways in the level. So now let's bring in a door to fill in our doorway. We'll just drag and drop that like so. This was also created with our blueprint system, so that now if I just jump in and start playing the game in the editor, I can explore my new little environment, and things like the door will just work for me. So let's move on and take a look at some of the new material features of Unreal Engine 4. So UE4 now uses physically based materials. That means that we define our materials using real-world physical descriptions. So here we have base color, which, based on the name, works probably exactly the way you think it would. It controls how light is absorbed along the surface. Next we have roughness. Now roughness controls how rough the surface is kind of at the macroscopic level. So as I lower roughness down to 0, you see the surface looks very polished. As I increase roughness, those reflections start blurring out and eventually get obliterated. So you could look at roughness as just how shiny this object is. Now next, we can also control how metallic a surface is. Currently the metallic value of this material is 0, and it looks like shiny plastic. As I increase that value, you see we blend over to something a bit more like chrome. And we can do some fun things as well. So here I have a couple of materials that actually displace the geometry they're applied to. So if we take a look at this in wireframe, you can actually see the vertices of those objects moving around because of the materials. Over here, we have an example of a material that's taking an input from a camera actor, changing it around a little bit and displaying it like a holographic display, which would be useful for like a security camera. Here we have something that's kind of similar. We're actually taking the final rendered pixels from the player's camera perspective, and then we're running those through a material that makes real-time changes to them to create sort of a Tron glowy sort of effect. Here we're doing a simple wipe between the final rendered pixel from the image and one of the many render buffers that the graphics card uses to draw each frame of your game. So what we're looking at here is the roughness buffer, or how shiny these objects are. Now materials can also be used as layers. So the 4 small rockets you see here each have their own completely unique material type. We have aluminum, chrome, copper, and shiny red plastic. The large rocket in the middle is using all 4 of those materials blended onto its surface as layers on a pixel-by-pixel basis. Now here we have a slightly more complex material. This has mask opacity, a couple of different material types panning across its surface. Notice how the opaque areas are shadowing naturally onto the surface underneath. And here we have a metallic surface with refractive water layered on top of it. We can select this and actually open it up. This is a material instance, which means that I can take the parameters applied to it and make changes. And those changes will update in real time in the editor. Or if I want to, I can open up the actual node graph that defines the behavior of this material under the hood and make changes in our material editor system. Now, materials can also respond to in-game events as well. So here I have ice, wood, and metal. And I throw fire at each one. And I get one type of response, or I can splash them with water, and we get a completely different response. And that final look is made possible entirely within the materials for each object. So let's talk a little bit about blueprints. Blueprints are our visual scripting solution in Unreal Engine 4. They allow you to take programming code and condense it down to a series of nodes and connections. This allows artists, level designers, non-programmer types to create their own in-game behaviors. Now, up to this point, I have just been playing the editor. It's now simulated the editor. This means that the game is playing without me, while I remain behind, and I can still select and work with objects. This is the blueprint graph for the bouncing ball that you see. The red pulsating lines indicate execution of the nodes that they're connected to. So here we have constant execution that is updating the location and the scale of this ball. So it's constantly moving up and down, constantly scaling to get that little bit of a wobble when it bounces. And on each impact, we see this lower branch of the graph execute, and that's creating that ripple effect that happens on each bounce. Now I can right-click on corral. So to show you how Blueprints made this possible, I'm going to jump out of the game. Now the game is playing without me right now. I can select the UFO, and we can take a look at its blueprint graph. I want to focus specifically on the part of the graph that controls that abduction beam. Now it looks like there's a lot going on here, and it's only because there is. We've got to turn the visual effect on and off, we have to control physics, we have to know when we suck something up and store that in an array so that we can spit them back out in the right order. So with all of that visible here in the graph, let's repossess the UFO and keep playing. Now watch, as I turn the beam on and off, you'll see that upper section triggering, as well as a little bit of the lower section, which is controlling physics. Each time something gets sucked up, which could include a tree potentially, you can see that third branch light up. Fortunately, my chip never fills up, right? It's harder to fly. And then as I spit things back out, we can see that fourth branch at the bottom execute. Now the best part is these are not all just a bunch of disconnected, disparate parts. Everything is seamlessly integrated, so there's nothing stopping me from taking my UFO and flying it back to my level. Sometimes different things happen when you do. All the way back to our little level, which is a really tight fit, but I think I can fit through here. Drop off a few more cows and things. And of course, it's always fun to break stuff, so... So satisfying. Can I hear it again? That is the whole reason I do these demos every day. So now that you've seen a selection of the tools and techniques available in UE4 and how crazy fun it is, I want to show you what 3 of our artists were able to put together in their spare time. These are guys who are actually on game teams, so they didn't really have a ton of time to dedicate to this. Now I'm going to play this back in the editor, but I'm going to hide the UI, so it's going to look a little bit more like a movie. Source code for the entire engine. We are giving you everything with new training content coming